There were a lot of scarves though.
Hmm.
Like he had that Fendi FF interlinking
Hmm.
thing. He had it in every color and every possible combination: gray and white, white and
Yep.
black, blue, brown and red. Like, it was like it was. I was amazed that they made that many variations on a theme.
It
He had
was
them
Well,
all. Lots of Louis Vuitton bags.
we talk
Lots
about,
of bags.
life with your competitors and knowing them, and them coming back at advanced age. What the heck do you make of Plushenko? Winning his, I think, 10th national title the other day. Doing two quads in a long program. What do you make about him coming back for almost his fifth Olympic cycle now?
I don't understand how his body is still in one piece. I really don't. Like he and I started doing quads at the exact same time. We started training them both when we were 13. I like the idea of me going out and rotating a double jump at this point in my life is horrifying, and like I would be scared to death. I don't know how he's been able to maintain.
He had spine surgery.
It's freakish.
Yeah.
It's freakish. I don't know. First of all, I don't know where you find the inner drive to continue to train a long program. I could go out and like train and do triple jumps and like do an exhibition program, fine, but like taking on learning, choreographing, and then training a new long program is mentally it's a lot to take on. And to continue to do that for like how long has he been senior?
Oh man,
His first senior worlds was what?
98.
Yeah. I mean, like,
like
come
15
on.
years.
I can't
Yeah.
even like it amazes me, but I'm also like, dude, why? Like let and he just even though he's doing things, he never to me has looked as strong as he did from like 2002 to 2006. Like
Hmm.
he does things, but they're not as pretty. There's not as much flow. He's not as dynamic. I don't see like he's won everything that there is to win, and let's face it, he's not getting a whole lot better. So like I don't understand the motivation to go on.
Well, it seems like you really made a point after the 2006 season to transition to school. You wanted to get your education, and you were taking classes at Loyola, I think, for a bit when you were training in El Segundo. And I've talked to so many skaters who just struggle with that transition of leaving competitive skating, no matter what level they're at, particularly now that really there isn't a tour to go on. And then what's next? How do they get? So how are you able to make that transition just so well? And what role did education play in your life while you were a skater? And how prepared were you for life after skating?
Well, I think the two main things. My parents always put a big priority on school. Like
Mm-hmm.
skating was a privilege. Skating was something I did, but had my grades not been very good, I would not have continued to skate.
And you went to public school, correct?
I
Because
did,
that's
yeah.
unique. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing that Carol had set up, which was very helpful, is that she had come to an arrangement with the school district that Winterhurst was in, and we would go to school for our academic classes only. So I would go, for example, I would go to like two academic classes in the morning, and then I would go to the rink for 2 to 3 hours, sometimes longer, and then take the remainder of my academic classes in the afternoon. So even though I was going to a quote unquote normal school and I was going full time, like I was doing all the normal academic stuff. Like I was taking all AP classes, I was doing a pretty rigorous academic program, but I didn't have, lunch or music or like basket weaving or what all those other nonsense, to be up
Basket
6 hours
weaving.
a day.
Yeah.
Really you have your English, your math, your science, your what else? A history maybe, I don't know. Those other
The
the
staples
classes
of,
with words and stuff.
yeah.
Um, but I think that made it a lot easier because it was always a priority. When I was growing up, I actually kind of missed going to school when I was training, but it was impossible. I mean, as you know, like
Hmm.
it was all we could do to like drag ourselves through a day and like go home and like sometimes you're too tired to even eat dinner. You're
Yeah.
just like wanting to go to bed.
You're laying on the couch at 6 p.m. like, is it 10 o'clock yet so I can go to
Yeah,
sleep?
and you're like it's like still light out and you're exhausted.
Yeah.
But and I think also what one thing that really helped sort of push me out the door and close the skating chapter was my last year was so horrifically bad in terms of results, in terms of how I felt about how I had skated, and like I mean, I really as miserable as training was at that point for a multitude of reasons, I really enjoyed my time with Audrey. But she was more of a therapist than a coach at that point. But like the last, especially from November through nationals, like the alarm would go off in the morning and I would cry. I'm like, how can I go to the rink and do this? I hated skating at that point. I absolutely hated it.
And I think
And
that's so a lot. I don't mean to interrupt, but a lot of skaters at the top level, people don't realize it becomes a chore sometimes, even when you're at the peak of your career. I think that's
exactly.
interesting. People
And
don't
it's
really
it's
understand
not
that.
even the physical necessarily, it's the mental. It's like you're like, "Oh my God, like I've done, like Friday rolls around and you're like, okay, well, so this week, let's look back. Yeah, all my programs on Monday sucked. Basically everything on Tuesday, I was like basically stealing oxygen from the other skaters. Okay, that was great. I was like, Wednesday was painful. So you like look back at your week and you're like, I feel like I worked really hard and basically undid progress. And so at that point, it was training was so miserable and like both physically and emotionally painful. There was like, all right, I've got to find something else to do. I've got to get out. And having been very successful and then having such a quick demise, basically. I mean, I went from like being on the world podium to like not even finishing in the top 10 2 years later. So I think to have a lot of success and then to pretty much fail, or like in terms of what I had done before, fail, made it very easy. I think the danger is for when people are kind of, they do well, they're in the top five, they're in the top six, they're kind of like, they're almost on the world team, and they're almost kind of, it's always like, oh, this person's moved on, this person's retired, next year's my year, and they get caught in that cycle. Whereas, like, if you're really good and then you're really not, it's very easy because you're like, what? I've done all I can do, it's done. But I think when you're kind of sort of in there and like kind of hanging, you're doing well, like you're getting fourth or fifth at a senior Grand Prix, and like people think that you're like, oh, if he would only just land this, or she would, put in a triple triple, it's going to be her year next year. I think that's when it gets really tough because logically it could be like
Hmm.
you could add that one thing, or you could have that spark or that sort of like breakout moment where you become kind of your own thing.
So it seems like your advice is to listen to yourself. It seemed like that's really what you were able to do, and it came easier to you because you could see your time in skating was on the decline and you had this
Yes.
plan. But for those other skaters, I think what you said was so poignant that sometimes you can listen to that buzz around you too. And maybe in your gut, your best days are behind you, but when
Yeah.
everyone's telling you, you just need that one breakout performance.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when
And
it doesn't happen, you think, oh my gosh, I just wasted 2 more years of my life
yeah.
waiting for that.
Yeah. And I think it's tough, and then on the flip side of that, you also feel like you need to keep going to kind of redeem yourself, or to kind of like prove that you had it in you, and then you get stuck in your own cycle because it's like, and I think oftentimes too, and I've seen it many times, and I know you've seen it in the different training centers that you've been in as well, is like when a coach doesn't necessarily have someone on top, they will convince you that you should stick it out for one more year. And I think a lot of it, I certainly not with coaches that I've worked with, but definitely things that I've seen where it's like the coaches are encouraging the kids to stay in by A, giving them false hope, and B, selfishly because they want to go to nationals. They
Right.
want to have a seat at that table. And I think I think it would probably, I've never done this. I've never taught someone at a very high competitive level. But I think the most important thing you can do as a coach, is to have that difficult conversation and be like, look, in my opinion, I don't feel that you're going to continue to improve. I feel like, at least in my opinion, you've accomplished everything that you're capable of doing. You've hit your maximum potential, and there's not really a lot more that you can do. Like, had someone done that for me in 2004, it would have saved 2 years of like pain and misery for me. So like, and like at some level, I'm sure that I knew I was on the decline, but like when you're in it, it's you don't realize it or you won't accept it or you in many cases you can't. I just couldn't accept it, and I think it's a coach's responsibility more than anything is to be supportive, but be like, look, like, you have some injuries, it's been a rough, you haven't really had a great competition this time. Like, had I told Audrey at Nationals in St. Louis that I was going to continue to compete, she would have probably sat me down and been like, that's probably not the best use of the next 9 months of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she would have done that for me. And I think obviously that's a horribly difficult conversation now because you're basically saying like, hey, it's over.
Right. You're
which is
throwing water at somebody's dream.
Exactly, which is like a terrible thing to do at the time, but I think in the long run it would have saved a lot of our peers a lot of like mental and physical anguish. And I think coaches need to be a little bit more in tune to that.